Hi everybody, I'm here at the site of the Battle of Rocky Mount, which took place in 1780 during the American War of Independence, near to what is now Great Falls, South Carolina. It took place at a fort on the banks of the Catawba River, and I'm here at the actual battle site. There's a very modest memorial that has been erected to the battle here, and there's not even a place really to park, so I'm actually parked on the side of the road. Since there's not much to see here at the actual battle site, I thought I would stop by and at least show the site a little bit, but then record the rest of the video on the Carolina Thread Trail, which is a beautiful trail. You can also access the Catawba River, so it's very nearby, near to where the battle happened. And it actually connects a lot of different people. About 2 million different people live along, in North and South Carolina, live along the Carolina Thread Trail. And you can just, look it up on the internet. If you live around here, you can just hop on it anywhere and start hiking. So it's pretty cool. So this was an important battle which took place. It was the first battle of Thomas Sumter as a leader of partisan troops, and so it's important. I wanted to cover it, and we'll be covering more about Thomas Sumter. But anyway, I hope you enjoy, and I don't want someone to come along and hit my car since it is parked on the side of the road. So without any further ado, I give you the Battle of Rocky Mount. So the Battle of Rocky Mount is a little bit hard to define. It wasn't a big battle. You could call it a skirmish. You could call it, really, it was kind of an 8-hour siege. But it happened in this context. The British controlled the Carolina coast because they had taken over Charlestown in May of 1780. Battle of Rocky Mount took place on August 1st, and that was so a few months later. In order to take control of the backcountry, the British had been putting outposts all throughout. There was an outpost at Camden, which occasioned the Battle of Camden, which I did a video on. There was an outpost at 96, and there would be a great battle there as well, great siege. But there was an outpost here, and this creek, or this branch of the Catawba River, is called Rocky Creek. And as far as I can tell, the fort was called Rocky Mount, and that's why it's called the Battle of Rocky Mount. So before I say any more about the battle, let me say just a little bit about Thomas Sumter, since he was the commander of the Whig forces at this battle. Thomas Sumter is a very interesting character. He was a very capable soldier, a born soldier. He was also a very mixed bag. I don't judge historical characters by the standards of our days. I understand most wealthy people in the South back then were slave owners. So I can, of course not approve of that, but to treat that, look at that with some distance and objectivity. However, Thomas Sumter did some things which even for his day were considered to be morally questionable. For example, he actually paid his men and captured Loyalist slaves as an incentive for joining. The irony of fighting a war for liberty and then paying the soldiers of that war with enslaved people was not lost on people at the time, and hit a little too close to home for comfort. So the man definitely had his flaws. He was still a great commander, and one of those few people that I think is a born general. Thomas Sumter was actually a Virginian, and he had started off his career as a militiaman during the French and Indian War. And he was apparently very good at it, very good soldier. So he was made a sergeant, and served in the Virginia militia for several years as a sergeant. He spoke the Cherokee language because he grew up in vicinity to the Cherokee, so he spoke their language. He was a very intelligent man, and before the French and Indian War was over, the English made peace with the Cherokee, and so they enlisted his aid as a translator in something that was called the Timberlake Expedition. So he went on this great expedition to carry an envoy of peace from the British to the Cherokee. And it's a really cool story. When he got there, along with a British officer, the Cherokee had been on and off with the British for years, and the particular representative of this group of Cherokee that they were speaking with and negotiating with was happy to hear that they were at peace with the English again, and said, all my life I've wanted to meet my father the king. I accept these terms, but take me to meet my father the king. And so now Thomas Sumter and this British officer had to get this Cherokee elder, I can't recall his name at the moment, I'll have to look that up, but had to get him down to Charlestown so that he could go to London and meet the king. And they did that. And at the end of it, at the end of the French and Indian War, Thomas Sumter was terribly indebted. I don't know if if he went into debt in order to fund the Timberlake expedition in some way. A lot of times men had to fund their own horses and their own equipment, so it could be that. But in any case, he went into debt with a very powerful creditor in Virginia, and he was actually put in debtor's prison. After a while, a friend of his, by the surname Martin, came by and paid his bond, so that he was able to get out of debtor's prison. So he got out of debtor's prison and left Virginia and came down to South Carolina. Which, was a different colony. It might as well have been a different world. No one in Virginia could touch him all the way down here. So he started his life as a gentleman planter down here, and he was apparently very good at it. Had a plantation on the high hills of the Santee River, which is close to modern-day Columbia, the capital of this state. And when the Revolutionary War broke out, he joined the pro-independence side, as most wealthy planters did, and quickly was made a captain and then a colonel in the Continental Army. So he served in the Continental Army for 2 or 3 years, and then in 1778, he retired, which sounds funny because the war didn't end until 1783. A lot of people actually retired. A lot of Continental officers actually retired in 1778 because that was the year that the French came into the war. And most people at that point on the American side thought that victory for the newly independent United States was a foregone conclusion. So in 1778, he retired and just started to chill out on his plantation on the high hills of Santee once more and just kind of wait out for the rest of the war. However, he would get a pretty big surprise when the British captured Charlestown in 1780. And at that point, he would become elected a colonel of militia and would raise a force of militia. And this would be the force of men that would compose the Whig side at the Battle of Rocky Mount. The commander of the Loyalists side of this battle was Lieutenant Colonel George Turnbull, and he was actually a Scottish settler in North America. He was already in his early 60s at the time of the battle, or actually no, early 50s. So, but anyway, he had fought also in the French and Indian War. He had been a captain in the 60th Regiment of Foot, known as the Royal American Regiment. And he had come from Scotland to America to fight in that war, and then settled in America after the war in New York. When the war broke out, he raised a group of loyalists called the New York Volunteers, and these men were New Yorkers, most of them from what we would now call upstate New York, as well as New Jersey. They had been dispossessed of their homes during the Revolution, and their families, their wives and children, if they had any, were refugees living in Manhattan. But they themselves were on campaign as soldiers in South Carolina. So there were about 150 of them. They were uniformed and trained like British soldiers. And when they got down here and garrisoned these forts, they attracted a number of South Carolina militia, who they in turn trained. And there are 150 New York volunteers, and also about 150 South Carolina Tory militia. Once these 300 loyalists had garrisoned the outpost, what they did was they built about 3 log cabins, which would have been called blockhouses. They would have had thick walls that were resistant to musket shot, and these would have been on a prominence, so a little bit of high ground. And in a circle surrounding these 3 blockhouses, which were close together, there would have been a circle of abatis, and those are logs that are carved to be pointy on the end, and kind of stuck at an angle coming out of the ground. So it was very well protected, very well protected fort. So while the Loyalists are garrisoning this outpost, building the fortifications, the local militia are being trained by the provincials. Thomas Sumter has decided to go into action mode. He recruited a militia. He had about 600 men with him on the day of the battle. A good way to think about militia are just think of them as kind of like a private army that's enlisted for a shorter period of time than regular soldiers. Usually when you look back and read the pension accounts, it says they were enlisted for about 3 months at a time. So they weren't uniformed. They weren't well trained. They were kind of trained, and they were enlisted for short periods of time. Always subject to change, those terms of enlistment. So anyway, I think he raised a total of about 900 men, but he had 600 with him on the day of the battle. And leading up to the battle, he received intelligence from someone who told him about this outpost here at Rocky Mount. However, it's likely that the intelligence he received from a double agent. So this source of intelligence told him, listen, there's a depot of loyalists, on the banks of the Catawba River, Rocky Mount, and they're not well fortified. They're not even going to be, resistant to musket. You're not even going to need cannon to attack them. When in reality, it was the blockhouses they had built were very resistant to musket fire. And he was an opportunistic guy. He believed him. So they set out to besiege the fort. So Thomas Sumter, who was a colonel of militia at this time, in charge of 600 Whig militia, thinking that the depot at Rocky Mount was badly fortified, and the fortifications had thin walls. They wouldn't even be resistant to musket shot. Set out with his 600 men to attack the fort and hopefully take it over. When he got there, of course, he received an unpleasant surprise. Like I said, it was well fortified and well garrisoned. And although they did outnumber the besiegers 2-1, or they outnumbered the loyalist garrison 2-1, still, it was a fortified, entrenched enemy, and it was their job to take over that fortified position, and they were going to find it very difficult to do, to say the least. Sumter and his men realized that in order to get to the fort and take it over it, dislodge the enemy from it, capture it, they needed to first cut down the abattises because they were pretty tightly placed together to where men couldn't really get in between them comfortably. So he asked for volunteers for what was known as a forlorn hope. A forlorn hope was a group of men that were going to volunteer and be the first into the battle. They were a storming party, and it was their job to go forward with axes and cut the abattises so that the whole force could just rush, so that Sumter's 600 men could just rush on the fort, and then there wouldn't be really anything that the Loyalists could do. So a group of men volunteered to be the forlorn hope, and very bravely attacked the fortification. They went forward with axes as well as their muskets, and set to work at cutting down the abattises. However, the Loyalists who were entrenched in the log houses, or who were fortified in the log houses, easily picked these guys off. And it didn't last long before the forlorn hope was driven back. 2 more times, storming parties went forward, and 2 more times they were driven back. So a total of 3 times a forlorn hope went forward to try and cut down the abattises, and 3 times they were driven back. I could not find any precise numbers on the amount of Whigs that were killed at the battle. The only sources said few, but that was probably a little bit of Whig pride that they didn't want to admit how many men they lost. I can't believe that it would have been a small amount of men that would have died trying to storm these fortifications, and the whole time getting picked off by these sharpshooters while they try and cut down these big logs. It's certainly not a job I would have wanted to have. But at the end of 3 different attempts, Thomas Sumter apparently said, all right, this is enough. Let's try something else. And that's what they did. What they did was they filled up a wagon full of pitch and set it on fire and rolled the wagon. I'm not sure how they got it to roll uphill into the fortification, but presumably they could have hidden behind it while they were pushing it. They rolled it towards the fortifications with the idea of trying to set these fortifications on fire. So they rolled a big burning wagon into it. However, once they'd done this and things were starting to catch fire, and the battle had been going on at 8 hours at this point, going on for 8 hours. At this point, it started to rain, and the rain set out the fire. And so at this point, they just kind of gave up the ghost. So having done everything they could to take the fortification and failing, and on top of that, it seemed like even the elements of nature were conspiring against them. Sumter and his men gave up and decided to live to fight another day. As far as casualties, like I said, figures are unavailable about the number of Whigs lost. I believe 10 enlisted men and 1 officer of the Tories were lost. So in terms of who won the battle, I think it was pretty clearly a Tory victory. The Tories held the fortification and drove the Whigs back. And so yeah, they pretty clearly won. However, it is significant that this was the first of Thomas Sumter's, soon-to-be General Thomas Sumter's, battles as a commander of Whig partisans, and he would go on to be very successful. He would definitely win more than he lost, and this was his first experience. George Turnbull would actually go on to live a long life, and he would actually settle in New York after the war. So even though he was a loyalist, probably because he was kind of a rich guy, they kind of let him get away with it. And he died in New York in 1810. Thomas Sumter lived to be, I think, 98 years old. And he would go on to be a politician. And they said about him that in war he was a politician, and in politics he was a soldier. So I hope you enjoyed the episode today. I definitely enjoyed making it along the banks of the beautiful Catawba River here, which you can kind of see in the background. If you like my videos and you want to support me, just leave a comment or give me a like or subscribe so that you can know when I come out with new content. Also, check out my t-shirt website, expedition-tees.com. I've actually started a new collection called the Revolutionary Collection. And one of my t-shirts is actually dedicated to Thomas Sumter, the original Gamecock. So that's a tribute to the man, for what it's worth. So have a look and check it out. And once again, thanks for watching. And as always, take care.